Well, welcome once again. We're here on a crab fest, and we've just had a reading about catching not crabs but fish, and having a successful haul, and Jesus and the resurrection and breakfast. And no doubt, if we open the doors, I suspect we could get some of the aromas coming over Island Street into that. Unfortunately, those who are watching live, unless you're down there now, you won't be able to kind of smell that, But I want to talk again, expanding on last week's sermon about the gospel being touchy-feely. It's about things that we can grasp, not just head ideas. I will excite you with talk of zombie monasteries. But first of all, what about that? What about that breakfast? Nothing gets men in better than a cooked breakfast. We've all been there at the hotel, haven't we, guys? And it says Continental, Alpen, Fry Up. And I don't think the conscience atoms even kind of come into, they don't even fire up, Somehow you just think, yes, we'll go over to that corner over there, and maybe just forget the roughage that we actually really need. Men will fall for a cooked breakfast every time. Nothing terrifies men more than opening up and talking about love. I get this in marriage preparation, or not actually so much in marriage preparation, but in the weeks before, when I meet a couple and I say, as part of the program, we're going to have this afternoon of talking about marriage and preparation for that lifelong relationship. And you can see them sort of going a bit pale. Am I going to have to talk about my feelings? Gulp. And actually, when we have it, it's not like some sort of therapy thing, but it's more about the philosophy of marriage, thinking, and they often come away all sort of puffed up and thinking, oh, that was rather good, actually. It wasn't wedmin, it wasn't about the flowers or the dress, or it was about something actually tangible. And I didn't have to talk too much about my feelings. Nothing terrifies men more than having to open up. Nothing thrills men more than a big catch and hauling it in, than a gamble that's paid off, than a prize that's been won, than an act of courage which has reaped an enormous reward. We are simple creatures, easy to please, secretly quite anxious, and can get annoyed quite easily as well. The resurrection story that we heard, it's got all of that in there, hasn't it? Isn't that marvellous? Why did he start with cooking fish? Why did he start with a cooked breakfast? It's hardly what you'd expect from the God-man coming before us. I suspect if I was an apostle at that time, I'd be rather thinking that there would be a sort of a train of angels descending, a big kind of theophany, Cecil B. DeMille stuff. And say it's a cooked breakfast. Well, it's great, but a bit odd, isn't it? Where's that train of angels that you read in the Revelation passage that David gave us a few moments ago? Well, I want to say that it is all there, but we just have to look a bit deeper. People sometimes ask me when it comes to funerals. You get people who come and plan funerals. I'm not going to look at anybody, because when I did this last bit, Harold Stanley of late said you kept staring at me, and I got freaked out. So I'm not going to stare at anybody. But sometimes when people talk about funeral plans, they'll talk about the hymns and the readings and that, and they'll ask me about what are you going to say, and I'll say I'm going to talk about the resurrection. Yes, I'm going to include about the things of your life, but I want to talk about the resurrection shining through your life and the resurrection to come, the resurrection here and now. I once had a dear soul who came up to the vicarage, and I forget her husband's name, and said something to the effect of, "Fred wasn't very religious, vicar." I said, "Well, he is now." He's having breakfast with Jesus of Nazareth, I haven't had that as far as I know. I'll come back to that in a minute as well. Sometimes I think the culture wants us to imagine that, in the next life, if there is a next life, then we're just sort of wispy-waspy ghosts, zombie half creatures, without humanity, without kind of flesh. Remember what I said last week when I got that honey dripping, that God wants to be as close to us as the honey is to the honeycomb. My wife told me off for putting the spoon back in the honey jar after I'd licked it. I was too much in a Winnie the Pooh mode, God doesn't want us to be phantasms. He wants the life that we are to enjoy, the next life, to be even more physical than the next one. Read the last chapter of the Narnia Chronicles. It's all there. The new Narnia was deeper than the old one, more physical, more tangible. Now, I want to go slightly off rail here and say I have this theory that when we get to heaven, we're going to find out that the physical Jesus occasionally had tapped us on the shoulder in earth. And it'll sort of freak us out a bit. It says, "Oh, I didn't know it was you." Just like those apostles who didn't recognise him initially or didn't dare to say. Now, that was so out of the ordinary. There's a great book called Joshua. It's one of my wife's favourite novels, and it's about 10 or so different encounters that people have with this carpenter who comes into a typical American kind of mid-belt community and sets up shop, and as quick as he comes, he goes, and each one of those chapters is a different conversation with that. Could it be that when we go to the next life, we find out, oh, I always wondered where that road sweeper or that cleaner had come, or that guy who gave me breakfast and said something that really changed me. I didn't realise it was actually you. This happens quite a lot in children's hospices. I think children are particularly open spiritually, and there's some great kind of accounts, stories of children having deathbed visions. I don't know if it's the one up in North Devon, but I did hear of one where a child who had only days to die said to mum and dad, in the afternoon, "Do you know that doctor who came to see me was great and told me how everything was going to be okay, and that I'd be with him for an extremely long time to come." And he held my hand and me a cuddle. And what did he look like? Oh, he had a sort of white gown dress thing on and a beard. And I said, the staff said there was no doctor in that day. You see, I think sometimes we can be a bit shy about talking about these sort of experiences as churches. And I put this again, as I have done in the past, if we ain't talking about them, if we aren't a place where people can come and talk about those profound experiences, what on earth is the point of us? Because people will go elsewhere and get all sorts of weird answers. Now, what about the zombie monastery? Well, it's not really a zombie monastery. I'm being facetious. I just like the subtitle because I think that's what people might imagine it to be. If you've ever taken a trip to the Holy Land, when you go from Jerusalem through the Judean wilderness to the Galilee, there's a place called Marsaba. it's extremely hard to get into. They are grumpy as a community when it comes to visitors and very private. Women certainly aren't allowed in. The community, I think, is about 1,800 years old and believes that John the Baptist may have probably even been the sort of founding father if you go right back to the 1st century. Those who have gone in have found it to be a place where heaven and earth meet in very strange ways. I mean, when you go on the bus, they'll point it out. If you watch Star Wars, the whole terrain looks a bit like Tatooine, you know. There's no water around, it's dry, it's hot. I think when I was there, it was like 42 degrees. It's about the hottest place I've ever been on in the planet. And I remember marveling and thinking, how can there be human beings actually joyfully living in that place? It looks so desolate. One American priest journalist spent time there. He noted that the monks never talked about the monks who had died as being dead, but rather asleep. And so here in the Judean wilderness, where prayer and fasting is regular, where John the Baptist started his ministry, where Christ was in the 40 days of temptation, where heaven and earth touch, where the walls between those two places are really thin, there are those who say as visitors that they might end up having coffee with a rather nice monk or two, and then later, talk to another member of the community, say the abbot, and said, do you know, that Brother Gregory was ever so nice. He was so full of God. And so, oh yeah, he died 20 years ago. He comes in now and again. Just likes to talk to visitors. And if you think that's a bit balmy, I think there's more of these stories around than we might imagine, even in our own neighbourhoods. Because Christ proclaims, and we say it in the Nicene Creed, that we believe in the resurrection of the dead. I can remember going to Glasshampton Monastery at Worcester. It's out in the absolute middle of nowhere. Nearly wrecked my suspension on my Ford Escort at that time getting there. And I spent 2 weeks in retreat at the age of 20. And the monks talked to me a lot about the supernatural happenings that occurred in that place. And there was a sense that if you looked out of the corner of your eye, retired members, in inverted commas, were not far. This world is full of the doors of Zion. Most of the time we are oblivious to them. We think heaven as some sort of attic where God is, and maybe one or two pious thoughts that we have, and we kind of think, well, maybe once in a while I'll go up and just check the attics there. When God actually, I think, has a completely different vision for heaven and earth than we have. And the ancients knew this so well. Why is it we've forgotten this? Why have we lost touch with this? To use an urban analogy that C.S. Lewis used, earth is a suburb of heaven. We're just in a segregated bit, and we haven't really quite figured how to get out of it. Earth is a suburb of heaven. So Jesus cooked breakfast. Maybe there's breakfast in heaven. Maybe if we ventured in through one of those, if we peeked through one of those doors, if we could, with a felt tip pen, draw a door on that lovely wall over there, and we could open it up and we could look into and see what St. John saw. We'd see not only millions of angels, but we'd see them having breakfast as well. A bit of a nice aroma. That would get the men into church, wouldn't it? Our physicalness is not accidental, and Jesus is seeking for us to be transformed in that way. The one thing that I want to get over is that the church is a body connecting heaven and earth. If earth is a suburb of heaven, then heaven is a society which spans the two, and most of our community is in heaven, is in that one society. Now, what would be their message if they can speak to us? Maybe they have spoken to us. We've just forgotten. If they popped in and had a cuppa with us, what are they going to tell us? I suggest this. I suggest that they will say what Jesus said to Simon Peter, is it's all about love. Love sacrificially. Forgive. Be merciful. Don't get into all that kind of petty politics stuff. St. Peter talking about, what about the beloved disciple? Is he still in? Is he still kosher? Is he still a member? No, he says, Simon Peter, we're all one community. Don't you worry about him or her or this or that. Just think about love, forgive, be merciful. See everyone around as immortal. And that's hard sometimes. But let the resurrection colour everything in our daily lives so that when we leave these doors today, we don't leave as practical atheists. But we leave with what this building and what these sacraments and the scripture contain. Let the resurrection colour everything. Jesus forgave Peter for denying him. Jesus appeared to Saul and made him Paul. He redefined him. He redefined his enemy to become his greatest friend. Will the resurrection redefine us? Let's then stand to profess our faith.